Well, thank you everyone for taking time out of your Friday to join us today. My name is Cynthia Ippoliti, and I'm chair of the LIRT Teaching Learning Technology Committee. And today is the first session of our spring program entitled Introduction to Digital Pedagogy. And I'm really, really excited to be able to present this program for everyone. We have some wonderful presenters lined up. But before I introduce them, I just wanted to send a big shout out and thank you to the committee for all of their hard work, and a special thank you to Alyssa, who is helping us with the technology, both providing the platform as well as the tech support. So this was a wonderful team effort on everyone's part, and I just can't thank everyone enough. So with that, just a few logistics. Their session is being recorded, and you will be able to get access to the recording after each webinar. In addition, both sets of presenters are going to go ahead and give their presentations, and then we will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of their sessions, and I will do my best to keep up with the chat and moderate the questions. I'm sorry you're hearing an echo. Let's see. I will try to hold the microphone away from my mouth a little bit, but I know then that people can't hear me, so hopefully maybe you can turn down your speakers as well. Sorry about the echo. So that's kind of the structure that we'll be taking for for the rest of the time today. And let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful presenters. First, we have Kristen Mastel, who is the Outreach and Instruction Librarian at the University of Minnesota. She received her Master's of Library Science from Indiana University and her undergraduate Bachelor of Arts from the University of Minnesota Morris. Her research areas of interest include instruction, information literacy, outreach, and instructional design. And Kristen is also past president of the Minnesota Library Association. She's also the director of the United States Agricultural Information Network. And on a fun note, she's getting a puppy in April. Next is Sara Lowe, who is Educational Development Librarian at Indiana University-Purdue University, Indianapolis. With close to 10 years of experience in academic libraries, she has presented and published nationally on topics ranging from instruction to assessment to legal research. And finally, last but not least, Bronwen Maxson is a Humanities librarian at IUPUI, specializing in languages and literatures. She is in her third year as a professional librarian and is interested in information literacy for international students and heritage Spanish speakers. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone on to Kristen and let her take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for that warm welcome, and welcome everyone on a Friday afternoon, especially from Minnesota, where golf courses are opening today because it's 60 degrees, if you can believe that, up here. So it is a lovely day. So the reason I'm joining you today is I'll be speaking about engaging students beyond the page. I do a lot of hybrid classes where I'll go in person and then have an online component, or I'll also teach kind of fully online. So that's kind of where my experience stems from. I'm the liaison to the College of Continuing Education, which is mostly returning adult learners, and then also extension staff, which are based all around the state, which is where a lot of my background in kind of online learning has developed because of that work and being working at Minitex's statewide cooperative. So since I don't have my video up, here's a little picture of me saying hello, and my contact information is on that slide. So today there's kind of three chunks to my presentation. The first part is going to, again, this is kind of setting the stage for the wonderful work that Sara and Bronwen does, which I'm super excited to be paired up with because I look up to you guys and gals quite a bit, I should say, these speakers today and the next ones in the following sessions. So I'm very excited to set the stage with a little bit, just a taste around backwards design for instruction. Then I'll kind of move into just a couple examples of what I and my colleagues have done here at the University of Minnesota. And then the last part is I'll talk about one way that I've tried to increase my impact and engagement with students through kind of follow-up surveys. So those are kind of the 3 components that I'll be walking you through today. So the first point that I really want to get across is just because we're using technology, by all means, does not mean engagement, right? I am guessing that at least a couple of you out of the 21 that are watching, that you probably have your email up and are doing some multitasking as well. And our students do that as well. Or how many times have you been to a restaurant and, you know, folks have their phones out and you're maybe not engaging with the person across the table from you. So just because we have all these wonderful tools, whether it's in Moodle or outside platforms hosted through your institution and other free ones, that doesn't necessarily mean engagement. It still kind of goes back to the design of how you're teaching determines if you're going to actually be engaged, whether it's online or not. So actually, I just got one of these books in the past year. It's a kind of an oldie but a goodie, and I forgot to put it on my slides. But I kind of love this book. It's called Teaching Naked: How Moving Technology Out of Your College Classroom Will Improve Student Learning. So that's kind of a goodie to check out if you want to get back to some of the basics of instructional design to then build and use some digital pedagogy off of it. So, hey, thanks, Cynthia, for being quick on your feet and finding that. So with that, I'm just going to give you a little overview. So what we normally do, and I know I occasionally do this as well, is we'll jump right into thinking about all the fun activities and the lesson plan, you know, how we're going to teach something. Rather, we need to kind of back it up and think about what do you want the students to know? How do we know that they're going to be successful? So we need to start with the how, really, before, you know, what they're going to learn. So there's a great quote by kind of the gurus of this that wrote the book Understanding by Design. Teaching is a means to an end. Having a clear goal helps us educators to focus our planning and guide purposeful action towards the intended results. So that, if you need some further reading, Understanding by Design is a great book around backwards design, really starting with what we want students to learn and how we're going to get them there, you know, using those activities and the technology to support what we want them to learn. So I'm curious, there should be a little person icon with a little hand raised. So if you could raise your hand, if you could click that little button and do raise hand if you have read Understanding by Design. So I'm curious how many of you have read that. Out of the group. Okay, so it looks like a quarter of you, which is great. So the first part is going to be a review, I'm sure, for a lot of you. So hang with me. So the next part, I'm curious, is I'm just going to briefly mention Shar Booth's book, Reflective Teaching, Effective Learning, which is kind of one of the staples in information literacy and instructional design for those of us in libraries. I'm curious if you could raise your hand, how many of you have read this book? Okay, great. So I have homework for those of you that have not read this book to buy it or request it through interlibrary loan. Like, you could even multitask and do that right now if you need to, or write it down. It's a great book that I know here in our university collection we purchase multiple copies, and we often do a lot of guided readings for new liaisons and new instructors at our university around this book, because it really kind of sets the stage. So here you can see she kind of created this user model, kind of starting in the upper left-hand quadrant with you kind of understand. So before we go into teaching, a good practice we always like to, if it's course integrated, is to, look at the syllabus, understand the assignment that you're hopefully teaching to and helping students work through. So you're kind of identifying that information need, what that problem is, figuring out the placement within kind of the syllabus or within the course load. And then you're kind of moving into the structure. What do you want them to learn? Kind of creating targets and goals here. And then kind of from there, once you know the goals, the kind of your learning objectives, how do we want to engage the students? So that's kind of a big part of today, and the great examples that Sara will have is around that engagement. So from that, we'll develop from the learning objectives, we'll develop the materials. So we'll develop the learning activities, we'll develop the handouts, maybe you'll create some LibGuides, all the different parts that support our instruction. And then, of course, we'll move into delivering the instruction, whether it's in person or online. But it doesn't end there. She has a great kind of 3-question reflection. So you need to assess your impact. So you might have students do a minute paper or fill out a survey. Maybe you're lucky enough to do really in-depth assessment, and you can actually look at maybe the bibliographies of papers or something like that. But you also, Sharbuth strongly encourages you to do self-reflection. So I taught last night, and 3 questions, what went well, what didn't go so hot, and what do I want to change next time? Because say I teach this course once a year, and it's been kind of in my repertoire. I have a good relationship with the instructor, so I'll probably be asked again next spring. Well, it's really good to be asked again, but you are probably going to forget in a year's span, what was a few things that worked really well that I want to make sure I keep, and what was that one thing that I should work on for next time? Maybe it's the pacing, or maybe the students didn't quite get this point based on the faculty feedback or their assignments. So, you can always tweak it. And then from tweaking it, you kind of start all over again. And you kind of bounce throughout this structure. It's not necessarily start at 1 and work your all the way around through 4. But you kind of bounce around. Maybe as you develop your learning activities, you realize, oh, I have too many goals. I need to go back and kind of fix that, the problem area, and narrow down exactly how many learning objectives I have. I personally like to only have 3 or less for like an hour bit of time that I have with students. So this is a really nice model to help you think about how you're going to structure either online teaching or in-person teaching. I think it works no matter what, and it really helps you get to the point of what's in it for them, identifying those goals, and being able to explain, by the end of this session, you're going to have, 3 sources that you can use for that paper, helping them get the buy-in. So that students really focus on your content, whether it's online or in person. So the next thing that I just want to talk about is another, again, kind of giving you a little more background information, is the idea of engaging students. So I was at a conference presentation here at the University of Minnesota, and they talked about how some of our students that are high in participation are not actually engaged, and that we're actually losing some students. So the retention is maybe not as high with this group of students that are in a ton of clubs, actively involved, but then, they're almost overly participating, and they're not getting to that deeper level of engagement, that deeper understanding. So this model of this engaged learner, that maybe they have a lot of interest, they're kind of stuck at this interest motivation level, but they haven't quite reached to the deeper engagement, so we're not getting, they're dropping out or failing out. So one of the ways that we can kind of help students to really retain information is to use kind of the scaffolding approach. So it's just another way to think about scaffolding information. So I know what we teach often to the first year students, you know, we're building on over subsequent years, and what we do in a senior seminar, you know, we're not going to reduplicate everything from a freshman course in a senior course. So we'll kind of scaffold and build. So the first part, you know, attention grabbing, which I'll mention another book to kind of give you some tools for the attention and interest levels. But from that, the interest level is really more than just kind of liking something. It's more around the situation. Is there a situational need? You know, they might be interested in listening to you and participating because they need to find 3 articles. So that kind of bridges their interest, and their motivation is to find those in order to get, you know, an A in their paper, for example. Or, you know, maybe we have some really engaged students that are just overachievers, or they're really interested in, maybe they'll become future library staff, so they're really motivated and interested in what we're talking about. Moving into engagement has to do around with initiating a combination of actions, effort, and persistence to work through a task. So it's not simply being interested, but you're kind of working through a problem. You're digging deeper into the content and internalizing it. And then lastly, that achievement piece is they've really ingrained that into their workflow, and that they can build on that knowledge in subsequent courses. So say they get an A as their achievement, and they've internalized the information. So I didn't do the greatest job explaining this model, but you can certainly read more in the book chapter that I have listed below here. But this just kind of, we're trying to get students beyond just paying attention and quasi being interested in what we're talking about. And I'm trying to help students move into deeper engagement, helping them, you know, beyond just a motivation of finding a couple quick articles, but I want to ingrain kind of the information that I'm sharing so that they can build and repurpose it and see how they can use it, not in just this one course, but how they can translate and move it across the disciplinary spectrum that they may be taking coursework in. So by internalizing, by engaging with the content, hopefully they're learning the process, not just the steps in a lockstep manner, but really internalizing that so they can apply it out in the workforce and beyond. So one way, just for the attention and interest level, that you can grab folks is through the book Made to Stick. So Chip and Dan Heath, I'm going to use my little raise hand method again. How many of you have read Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath? It was kind of a bestseller about probably 10 years ago. Okay, just a couple of you. So again, another little homework assignment. This is a must read. They have a great companion kind of piece and themes throughout it, all around teaching. So they use a ton of different examples around teaching. So they have these 6 core concepts. So how do you make sure an idea is memorable? And how do you get people to internalize something? How does it become almost a part of culture? One idea is to keep it simple. So I have a little quiz. We'll see who's fast on the draw and paying attention. So I'm going to give you a brand slogan or a saying, and let's see who can get this first. So you can use the little chat box and see. It's going to be a simple slogan or saying, and see if you can write down the company that it's for. So, like a good neighbor. Ah, awesome. State Farm is there. All right. I'm loving it. Yep. McDonald's, Mickey D's. Great. The quicker picker-upper, which you might need after you have McDonald's. Bounty. Yep, exactly. And the last one, shave time, shave money. Homework, close, close, shave, I'm going to say. This is a newer one, so folks might not be as familiar, but I bet our students are. Yep, so you're on the right. Yes, someone got it who did. Alyssa, Dollar Shave Club, which is really popular with folks these days. Very fast-growing company. So these are little slogans. They're kind of catchy often, but the idea is how do we boil down our information to maybe some of the really core concepts. So you can think of your learning objectives. Keep them simple. Kind of straightforward. Another thing is unexpected. So we want to grab people's attention. So you can kind of, one way we do this in, I know our medical school and our medical librarians, they will pose kind of the end of a case study. So for example, someone died. And then they kind of work backwards and problem solve kind of in a backwards manner. So sometimes you could do something a little unexpected, kind of rework things that way. I think one of the things that we do really well in Library Land is giving concrete examples. So using real life examples and language that evokes images potentially. So it's great when our teaching can align with, you know, work-life balance. So I know I do a lot. One of my programs is construction management. So whether they're writing, you know, case studies using real-world local examples. For example, they had to analyze the 35W bridge collapse. So this is a real-life local example. A lot of imagery there, and you know, really applies to that discipline. And then, of course, we are all about credible information, providing evidence, whether we're teaching, you know, citation managers or dealing with the whole concept of fake news now. There's a lot of opportunities here. And then emotional. This one I struggle with personally. It's hard for me to, you know, tug at someone's emotions, maybe combining a story and making it emotional. Oftentimes I will use, you know, student quotes or examples. In the past, for example, I did have a student plug in a laptop and it started to smoke, and his hard drive fried, like right there in my office, and he didn't have it backed up. So that is a, you know, you can feel that in the pit of your stomach, and that will get you hopefully to back up your data and pay attention to my suggestions that I'll work through in a class. And then the last one is story. So you can think about sitting around a campfire and how you might riff off of one another or share stories around a campfire. And so how can you use personal stories or student stories or encourage discussion? So the book says that you don't have to do all 6 of these, but think about incorporating a couple of these into your instruction, whether it's online or in person, and you have a higher probability of making your information stick. And so a few ways that I've put this into practice, again, trying to move beyond just that interest and trying to get students a little bit more engaged at a deeper level at the University of Minnesota. So one of the examples is just the power of questions. And I think, how many of you think designing a really good question is hard work? You can raise your hand. So like developing those thought-provoking questions, especially in an online form, if you're using discussion boards like I am in Moodle, it's really hard. And I came across Michelle Martin's little scale here, and I thought it was really helpful. I know in the reference interview, if you went through that, you know, you're taught not to ask yes/no questions. But this is a really nice scale to kind of move beyond kind of who, what, when, and move, or I should say the who and which and when, which are more kind of options, to a little bit more thought-provoking, powerful questions. So what if da 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 da? Why, explain this. It's just kind of changed my thought process. And sure enough, when I was thinking about one of my most successful teachers that I've had in my career was one of my art history professors. And she, almost every other class period, would ask a question. For example, if we were studying Leonardo da Vinci, it would be, she has this cafe question she would ask. What if you were sitting at a cafe and you were enjoying a coffee, but if Leonardo da Vinci sat down next to you and he was drinking an espresso, what would you ask, knowing that you just have a short bit of time that he's going to be there for? So that kind of gets you to think about, okay, short bit of time, super influential person, around what I'm studying, what on earth would I ask? So, think about how you can maybe rework some of your questions, whether you're using Moodle or Canvas and posing questions that way, or maybe you're using another tool, such as what I have here, like VoiceThread, is another tool that we use quite a bit at the University of Minnesota because it embeds pretty nicely in Moodle, where you can put up slides or you could put up images, and then you can have questions, and students can respond either with text or with audio-video response and kind of bubble up with and engage kind of with the text that way. So this is just a screenshot of my coworker, Megan Coker, because she happens to be using VoiceThread the most currently. And so, she kind of walks through different resources and uses kind of equine history. So it's very interesting bits of information throughout, woven into kind of traditional library databases and talking about archives and what unique things can be in there. And then students can pose questions either in Moodle or VoiceThread and so forth. So you can think about how to integrate those reflective questions into an online tool like VoiceThread. The other thing that we use, and I will say I'm very lucky that this tool has been created at the University of Minnesota. It's called Flipgrid. There's other tools that are similar to this. It happens to be free to me because it's developed here. I believe it's a small charge now if you use it elsewhere. So for International Education Week in November, since I'm the liaison to the Minnesota English Language Program, we had everyone, record a video saying why they were glad that international students are here. And due to the recent political climate, we've been sharing this Flipgrid out more and more. So it's been really, really powerful to use and to be able to have a conversation around campus and to share our feelings and thoughts kind of in an online format. Oh, thank you, Lisa and Cynthia, for posting more information about Flipgrid. So it's a great tool. It's literally click, record, go. You can record like a 90-second blurb, very low tech and very point and easy to use. So that's another tool that I have integrated into not only kind of my library course pages, or we don't have LibGuides, but our version of LibGuides, and then also into Moodle is to get student feedback on these questions that we pose. So that's another way of asking kind of powerful questions using a certain tool. And kind of also creating a sense of community, because that's a really hard thing to do in an online environment. I'll just quickly say, because I'm running out of time here, another one of my colleagues was teaching a whole semester-long course. In the first few weeks, she had folks use Flipgrid to kind of help get to know each other. And then she gave students the option of either using this Flipgrid and recording a video, or writing things out. And the Flipgrid response rate dropped through the floor pretty much. I was pretty shocked, and I want to dig into this more, that students preferred to write rather than record a video, which I was not expecting. So I want to dig into that idea a little bit more. I just heard that fact just a moment ago. And I want to leave you on one way that I'm trying to move towards achievement. So moving beyond just engaging online and in the classroom to a more follow-up method. So there's this 222 customer service model. And the way that I've adapted it is within 2 days of instruction, I'll thank my faculty for the opportunity to come in the class or to be integrated into the lesson or Moodle module for that week. 2 weeks after, I'll send students a little check-in on the action items that I have them do. And then 2 months or at the end of the semester, I'll check in with the faculty on their final products. And the 2 weeks after, you know, I keep in mind when their assignments are due. So that gets moved around a bit. But whenever I add instruction or whenever I do teaching, either online or in person, the question I always end students with is, what is your next step? What are you going to do next? Because it's not just good enough for me to ask, you know, was this session okay? Did you get everything out of it that you needed to? I want them to walk away knowing and affirming, like, where should I go next? So with that, I've done kind of a two-parter. I've created a Google form to kind of gather students' next steps, and then I'll follow up using Qualtrics. So what I've done is I did a little post-session or post-tutorial. So after they complete some of my little quick video tutorials in Moodle, or if I am lucky and I have a hybrid course, they'll put in their name, their email. I will say this is usually part required by faculty to ensure that they actually watched like my little video tutorial and engaged in the discussion boards. I'll, you know, for example, here's a question. I asked them if they're a super searcher or if they're still unsure. And then I ask them what their next step that they're going to take within a week, and then to give me a deadline. And then based on that, and I know this is really hard to see, is in Qualtrics, there's a way that you can pull all this information, create a contact list, and then you can create, you know, like a custom email. So here's my custom email, dear, you know, me, student, and then I have the question, to what extent have you followed through on your action item? And then it auto-populates what their action was that they said they were going to complete. And then I ask them how much they've completed from nothing to they've totally completed the task. And then I ask them, you know, if you were to present your speech, for example, to me, what point do you wish you had more information or data about to strengthen your speech? And then I let them know, depending on what they're going to put in there, I will follow up with them and maybe give them some more tips and tricks or point them towards some good resources to support that speech, for example. So this is just another way that I try to ingrain not only my services and that I'm always here, but try to move them into kind of deeper learning and more kind of action on their part. So with that, that's just about my time. I think I took just about 30 minutes. I know we're going to hold questions until the end, so we're lucky and we get to see some more examples from Sara and Bronwen.
Great. Thank you, Kristen, so much. I learned so much in this short time. I'm going to be stealing all of, most if not all of the wonderful suggestions that you have. So everyone, please give me just 1 second to go ahead and load the next set of PowerPoints, and then we will move on to Sara and Bronwen's presentation.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear us okay?
Raise your hand.
Yes, good. Okay, excellent. So I'm Sara Lowe, Educational Development Librarian at IUPUI.
And I'm Bronwen Maxson, a Humanities Librarian here.
So in our section of the webinar today, we'll explore the various digital learning objects that we've developed and adapted at IUPUI University Library in order to meet users where they are, both in and outside of the classroom. I would like to stress as we start that we did not do this alone. We've adapted excellent work from other libraries and have a great group of librarians, the Educational Services Charter Group, which has helped us develop some of this. And I also need to do a special shout out to Yu Young Lee, who is our digital user experience librarian, who is fantastic with helping us do usability studies and that kind of stuff.
So this webinar is also about meeting you where you are. We want you to think about your comfort level with digital pedagogy and learning objects, as well as your institutional context, which may have more or less support for librarians as you design learning objects. And you and your library might already be there or almost there, but getting a big picture view of what you are doing can help pull it all together and make sense of the different parts. So in the chat window, we'd like you to think about one question that you want answered by this webinar, and we will do our best to address them. We'll give you a minute to type. All right, thanks for that feedback. We will be able to touch on all of those things. If you do have further questions, keep typing. So we're going to talk about learning theory and digital pedagogy today, catering to your student body and tech skills. So these are 3 things to consider. With digital pedagogy, it's using technology to change teaching and learning, but we want to use technology in an intelligent way and allow for meaningful exchange to occur. So be critical about how you choose tools and whether or not it's appropriate to use technology for the goals that you're trying to accomplish. As far as pedagogy, you also want to take into account things like universal design for instruction to make sure that everyone in your class is able to use the tools that you're creating and able to understand them. You want to make it active, and keep in mind that reflection can be active learning. So take moments in your instruction to allow students to reflect on what they're learning. And make it personal. So use your personality to engage users. Use your sense of humor. Like Kristen mentioned, use images and real-world examples. You also can customize your resource to fit your institution and your local context. So the institutional context here at IUPUI is a 4-year state school. We have 30,000 students. Some are commuters and some are residential. We also have 20 liaison librarians, and we are all going in different directions. And as far as institutional support for technology, it varies. And we will get into that in a moment. So the tech skills that you need to have include using the LibGuide software, and campusguides.com has a lot of helpful guidance if you are new to LibGuides. PowerPoint, so hopefully most of us are pretty familiar with that already, but you may need to brush up skills on embedding images and exporting your PowerPoint to an MP4 if you want to do a narrated video. You should also have some skills in image creation and manipulation. And you want to take accessibility into account, like I mentioned earlier with universal design. Be thinking about people possibly using screen readers to access your content, or closed captioning and things like that. And finally, you want to be fairly familiar with your LMS.
So here at IUPUI, we use Canvas. And some of the resources we have include a green room for production of videos, and we have a sound booth in our Center for Teaching and Learning where we can record audio. We do have some IT development support, and they mostly work with our Digital Scholarship Center, so sometimes they're not always available to help us, but we just manage. And we've relied heavily on adapting products from other libraries and using LibGuides because those are things that are already accessible to us. So this is a moment for you to reflect on your own institutional context. Maybe jot down a note, think about what resources you have and what you might need to look into.
All right, so thinking of your institutional context, now we'll get into where we're meeting these students. So we're meeting them, obviously, in the IL instruction session. So we're doing this through pedagogical style course guides. This actually all started with a blog posting by Allison Hicks, Pedagogy to Oppress, which if you just Google, you'll find it. But it really got us thinking about how our guides are designed. And they were leaning pedagogical, but there was still a lot of Pathfinder type elements. And this is actually, I'll get in a second to how we've assessed this. But so Pathfinder is the normal just list of resources, but without any explanation of really the why. Why are we doing this, right? Why should you care? The how, obviously, it's just using LibGuides, so it's super easy. But even if you don't use LibGuides, you can obviously make any way that you create, online guides, you can make pedagogical. There are some pros and cons to this. Obviously, the pros, it allows students to come back and refer to the material later, which they always could, but in a Pathfinder style, again, it's just that list of resources, so it doesn't necessarily help them understand the why if they don't really remember. So this makes it a little bit more meaningful when they go back to it. It is through LibGuide, so it's super easy. And the nice thing is you can actually do your own testing, your own assessment of this. Usability testing, you create 2 guides, say one pedagogical, one Pathfinder, or whatever you want to do. And then you can test which works better, one or the other. Cons. Every liaison controls their own guides. All we can do is lead them to the water. We cannot force them to drink it. So we're not 100% compliant yet. And it can take a lot of work and time to retool online guides, as we all know. So since we started LibGuides before we had this kind of pedagogical approach, there's a lot of guides that aren't compliant. But the whole reason we did this is because we started to do some research on this. So we've actually got 2 research projects that we've done, and we'll be presenting these at Lowe, just FYI, where we're trying to figure out, does the guide actually impact student learning? And the reason we've moved to pedagogical style guides is because the 2 research studies we've done so far have shown, yes, students have greater self-efficacy and also demonstrate greater learning with pedagogical style guides. So this on the screen now are the results of a study that we just did. This was A/B testing in a classroom, so it was two sections of a class, both taught by the same instructor and both taught by the same librarian. The only difference was one class got a pedagogical guide and the other class got a Pathfinder style guide. So you can see that from the post-test to end of semester, learning, the pedagogical guide folks retained a lot more than the Pathfinder. And then when we look at the annotated bibliographies, the students doing the pedagogical guide actually had higher levels, higher scores in every level, and actually citation is statistically significantly different. So when we think about assessing this, the other study we did was a usability study, and it demonstrated that students only click about 4 tabs. So our usability and studies have actually made us go back and continuing that assessment cycle, right? closing the loop, going through, actually making changes based on how students use things and how best they learn in this environment. So now the research process that we have on our basic beginner student guide has gone from 8 steps to 5 because it better meets students where they are. All right, hopefully that makes sense to everyone. We're also meeting them in their classroom. So here we've got the LibGuides LTI. So in case anyone doesn't know, LTI is Learning Tools Interoperability. And basically there are a ton of LTIs and they integrate with the various LMSs, the learning management systems, right? So this has been fantastic because it's allowed us to, again, meet students where they are. But if we're not even in the class, so if we're not even teaching the class, we don't even need to be in the Canvas course site for this. You can do this all from LibGuides. So it is super awesome. In fact, I love this LTI. The previous Canvas integration had actually just had a link to the library homepage. So it was kind of like, wah, wah, so what? Students would click there. They wouldn't know what they were doing there. Why am I clicking on this? It didn't really connect to them in the class. So now we actually connect course guides in individual classes, which you can see an example of here with a class I taught last year. So there's seamless integration of course guides into the LMS where students are doing their work, where students are. The how, the skills necessary for this actually are really easy. The LTI, both the Automagic and manual instances, are super easy to do. The only issue we had here at Indiana University is that it took about 6 months from first asking IT to getting the LTI embedded because they had to do an extensive security review. And I think I noticed that one of my IU colleagues in Bloomington is actually on this, on this webinar. I think the only reason it happened in 6 months is because our Bloomington colleagues came forward and also wanted to do the LTI. So I think having 2 campuses is the only way we even got it done in 6 months. I think it probably would have been longer had it just been us up here in Indianapolis. Pros, cons, hi Meg. Librarians and faculty who use it love it. We've actually gotten a lot of fantastic feedback. Librarians who weren't in the habit of creating course-specific guides are now doing so because of the ease of embedding and feel like the guides will actually be used. Usage statistics are great, and usage statistics not just of the guides, but also databases linked from the guide have increased since we've done this LTI. So clearly students are using this stuff. And I should say, there's actually an article by Moon in the Journal of Library and Information Science Distance Learning from 2015. There's a great quote. Although librarians may be hesitant to learn yet another technology, it's a fact that the LMS is where students are working and learning. So obviously we want to meet them where they are. All right. And I've lost my place. Hold on. Hey there. Yes, thank you. All right, assessment is ongoing. One of the cons is the fact that faculty, since they were used to just having a link to the library homepage before, a lot of them are actually hiding the tab and they don't know what it is. So we did a survey this fall and 70% of faculty did not know what library research guide was and they didn't use it. So clearly liaison re-education is required. We need to have liaison librarians going out and pushing this to faculty, and that's something we're going to be starting. And depending on how customized you want it, adding the LTI metadata can take a little bit of time. So if you want individual course guides, obviously that's a little bit more than just having one guide that lives in all Canvas course sites. But here's an example. So you can see it's super easy. You don't even need to be in the Canvas site, as I said. You just see the little wheel icon in LibGuides. You click Guide Metadata and add the LTI. So it just could not be easier to add this. All right.
So we're also finding ways to meet them at home. So after hours, outside the classroom, And we're doing that through self-guided tutorials matched with Canvas quizzes. So some examples are the Start Your Research tutorial that we have, an Introduction to Library Research, an Academic Integrity tutorial, and you can see on the right the quiz is pretty standard looking. So why did we do this? Well, there were no general tutorials available. We had some that were in video format that were already aging, and we were not able to get in and edit old screenshots, for example. So we needed something that was generic also that could be used across the curriculum, and something that was easy to update. The Canvas quizzes are helpful because they are already part of our LMS, and they provide data to the librarians and the faculty so that we can find out, as mentioned earlier, how the students are doing with learning these skills. We adapted both the Start Your Research tutorial and the Academic Integrity tutorial. So, so we had to have some skills to be able to do that. They were both available through Creative Commons, so that was nice. But with the self-assessments, we had to convert some Flash to HTML5. So that is something that you might need to look into. As far as the quizzes, they are, if you already know how to create Google Forms or use SurveyMonkey, then you are good to go. And our assessment is ongoing, so we are still gathering feedback and learning how these things are affecting students, and we'll come back around and close the loop again when we have better data. There are some pros and cons. So the pros, once the tutorials are adopted, the upkeep is pretty easy. Because we use the LibGuide software, the tutorials can be embedded into Canvas site through that LTI, and you saw that little bit of code on the other page. All we have to do is type in that code, and it's magic. They allow for a flipped classroom, so you can do some pre-assessment to free up class time to do something else. And anyone can learn the skills, even if the faculty don't assign it, and it's not, even if they don't assign it, it's not in the Canvas site. Anybody can still find these tutorials and use them through the library website. A con, on the negative side, the adaptation took a lot of time, but now that it is in LibGuides, it's easy to update. And we only have self-assessments right now, which is why we had to, excuse me, which is why we had to move to Canvas quizzes. So with the Canvas quizzes, like I mentioned, they're pretty easy to use, and similarly in Blackboard and other LMSs, you just need to know how to write a question. They can be for credit or not for credit, and they're auto-graded in Canvas, so that makes it pretty easy to see how the students are doing. You can also export the data and do some more in-depth analysis. And these quizzes are great for pre-tests and post-tests. So here's an example of a video tutorial that I made, a slide cast rather, through PowerPoint. I narrated the slides and then exported the file to an MP4 and uploaded it to YouTube. The nice thing about YouTube is that it automatically adds the closed captioning, and as you can see, it spelled my name the Welsh way, so I was able to go in and edit the captions. And these are really pretty easy to create and customize to fit whatever course you might be working with. This was created for an English for Academic Purposes course for international students. So it was, why did I create it? It was requested by the course instructor, and I already knew how to use PowerPoint, so it wasn't as intimidating to build something from scratch. I met with the disciplinary faculty to discuss what the students, where they were struggling and what the course outcomes were, and then I was able to use our sound booth here in the Center for Teaching and Learning in the library to record over each slide. As far as assessment, some of the faculty requested the students review tutorials, so they actually emailed me their feedback, which was lovely. And then some tutorials have a built-in activity where I will ask the students to pause and write down 3 keywords and then turn it into their instructor later. So a pro is it's pretty easy to make. A con is that it doesn't allow for embedded quizzes, but there are other tools that do. This is just one that was just easy to get off the ground quickly.
And I should add that recently we found out that we realized that through Canvas modules, you could actually add embedded guides. I mean, we kind of already knew this, but you can split up tutorials. So what you could do is have a bit of a PowerPoint tutorial and then have an embedded quiz in Canvas and then go back to the tutorial. So you can kind of have little parts of a module, which would allow you to kind of embed those self-assessments. All right, and finally, we meet them at 3 a.m. So we have Library DIY, which actually we adapted from, so there's an original at Portland, and then Indiana University Bloomington, our friends down south, adapted it, and we took it from them. But the reason we did this was because we did usability studies, and it showed that 40% of students went to the library how-to link when we asked them questions like, where would you go if you don't know where to start your research project? So 40% of students were going to a place that had nothing about how to start a research project. So we were looking at different things that had been done, and I had seen presentations on Library DIY at a conference years ago, and the original in Portland, and then found out that Bloomington had actually adapted it. So it seemed to make a lot of sense, especially for our shoestring budget kind of up here. So we put this, now this lives under how to. So now students we're going where they are, right? They think they can go here to find something about how to start a research project, and now they can. So we try really hard to meet them where they are. Obviously, very simple again to get through. Assessment is ongoing. We're doing usability and then getting feedback from faculty and librarians to find out how they're using it, to add content, tweak content, make it more relevant to our student body. Obviously the pros, it's great because the structure was there because Bloomington had already pulled it over. Thank you, Bloomington. Our usage statistics demonstrate that it's getting really good use. The only con is, since there's so much material here, it takes a lot of time to adapt the materials. All right. So, in conclusion, there is no magic bullet. Cast a wide net to meet users wherever they are, to really kind of, wherever they are, you want to be able to give them something that can help them meet their needs. Do what works best for your context and skill level. I mean, things like Captivate and Articulate Storyline, those are fantastic tools, but they can be cost prohibitive. And if you don't know how to use them, then what's the point? You'll just get caught up in trying to learn this new technology. If there's already something out there that can help you, don't worry. My advice always is, just don't worry about learning it, unless you want to, of course. But repurpose, reuse, and recycle. Librarians love to share the content we've used here. It's all CC, or we've made it CC. So use, and don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Everybody says this all the time, but it's actually so true, especially for this type of stuff. Everything is always in beta. I've gotten pushback from higher administration that, this should, oh, well, we're not sure if it's going to work, or it's not quite perfect yet, but if you wait until it's perfect, you'll never do it. So it just needs to be done, and then you modify it through usability and things like that to help get that. So again, assessing usability. look for ways to improve things, assess things. For example, our tutorials, there's a new thing now at IU where it's kind of outward-facing Canvas course sites, and we're actually thinking of putting our tutorials there because that's where students are, so to better meet them, but they would still be accessible to anybody, which is great. And do that assessment, do usability studies, do A/B studies, everything's the same except one element you change to figure out how best to do this, right? You do focus groups, do surveys, do those things so that these things really work as best as they can for folks. Yeah.
So in the chat window, if you still have a question to ask, please type it and we'll address it. Of course, there'll be more time for questions afterward as well, but something specific to what we've presented.
Oh, yeah. And I guess we're going to do more questions later, so we can we'll hold that for a second.
Okay, never mind.
But,
so for your own self, share with us, share with your colleagues, what is one way you can use what you've learned today? Yeah, VoiceThread, I've got a faculty member who uses that. Cool, I'm glad to see people are going to rethink their LibGuides.
and we should just say thank you. If you have any questions, obviously you can email us with specific things and we can send you specific information about anything we've done. And Bronwen actually has a huge,
I've got a list of articles I've been reading about creating useful content. So if you want that list, I've put it in Zotero. And contact me and I'll send you the link. Thank you.
That's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Sara and Bronwen. Again, I learned so much and will be stealing everything as much as possible. So thank you for that. Before we get into Q&A, just really quickly, just a reminder that you will be able to see the recordings at this URL, and I'll go ahead and, if I get a chance while the conversation is going on, I'll type the URL in the chat box as well. So with that, we have about 25 minutes or so, and I'd like to just go ahead and open it up for any additional questions that you may have that any of our three presenters can answer. So I will go ahead and start looking at the chat window. That's a good question, Lisa. I believe our presenters have agreed to allow us to share their PowerPoints, and so I believe we'll be able to put all of that on the website. I will double check, but I agree that that's always helpful.
Oh, the book that I mentioned with the user method, it's Reflective Teaching, Effective Learning, Instructional Literacy for Library Educators. It's by Shar Booth.
So question for Sara and Bronwen, did you consider using LibWizard?
Oh, we did, but because we already had kind of the Canvas, and it was just easier to kind of move into there, especially since faculty were asking for a way to assess it a little bit more that was then integrated into their course. So it just made a lot of sense to go there, because otherwise it still would have been it was meeting them where they are mainly. It was really easy to go where the faculty and students already were. So.
Great, thank you. And unless anybody else has any other questions, we can go ahead and adjourn a little bit on the early side. I don't want to rush anybody. We have plenty of time. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. But otherwise, again, look for the materials, and all the links should be preserved in the chat window. And I would like to thank all of our wonderful presenters one more time. This was very, very, very informational and engaging, and I certainly will be looking for all the materials as well. And I wish everybody a great rest of your Friday and a nice weekend. And we are going to go ahead and stop recording and close out the session. Thank you very much.